Welcome back, everyone. Today, we are diving deep into the world of real time data analytics for supply chain optimization. In this episode, we continue our talks about supply chain with our partner, Mirko Sanatori, a seasoned leader in the supply chain domain and the founder of the Wolf practice. Thank you for joining us, Mirko. It's a pleasure to have you again here.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot for inviting me back on stage.
Yeah, thank you. As I highlighted today, we will focus on real-time data analytics. And the first question is, how do companies use real-time tracking and predictive analytics to tackle the problems like port congestion, weather setbacks, or political issues?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the way companies utilize real time data and like big data analytics has been changing a lot over the years, because I think we're still in a phase of uptake. Okay, so we're probably not yet there where we could potentially be, with this vast amount of data. And on the other side, we're so much further compared to where we were just like 4 to 5 years ago. So things have changed, and today I think the state of the nation is really using and leveraging this data to start making adjustments on the go. Okay, so on fly. So effectively, think about port congestions. Clearly, it's very useful to have real-time information over, for example, the vessel times, the actual expected times of arrival, and this is something that is useful for the shipper on one side. It's also useful for the port management on the other side, because clearly sometimes there are situations of port congestions, and you need to know where to host and where to unload these big, huge vessels that are coming through. So technologies like GPS, of course, very well known, very established technology, and AIS as well. The automatic identification systems. So those are technologies that are being used today. But the other thing is that there is also an element of predictive analytics. So utilizing indeed artificial intelligence models to really analyze, for example, congestion trends. Okay, so like really not just a snapshot of the situation, but effectively seeing what's happening and what's likely to happen moving forward. And this is something that sometimes might allow to suggest rerouting options, or even alternative ports. For example, with real-time predictive analytics, you could really suggest for a vessel to go to a different port. Of course, there are implications. There are like customs documentation to take into account. But if we think about the potential and what we're starting to see, I mean, this is something that is working today. And like major companies like, for example, Maersk, DHL, they are already using AI-driven rerouting. So really like models to do this like on the go type of routing. And so this is one element. The other element, you mentioned weather setbacks. Of course, weather setbacks, it's something that might have a significant implication. So, and that's something that on one side we could think of as, okay, there might be a disruption due to weather. Imagine like, it's very typical in some countries, as the first heavy rains start falling during the autumn period, sometimes there are a lot of floods. Okay, it's been systematically the case year after year lately, and clearly, so that there's one element of understanding what's going on, how the weather is impacting the overall infrastructure, and making adjustment accordingly. But even if we think about it from a what's happening to the product, I mean, of course, if you think about like one element like temperature. Okay, so temperature of the product, particularly for certain industries, is just significantly critical element. Okay? So if you have sudden spikes in temperature, or if you have sudden drops, temperature goes incredibly high or very, very cold, then of course things might happen depending on the type of protective packaging, type of thermal insulation that is provided with the product. And that's something to be taken into account. And of course, IoT sensors are very, very good for this, because clearly they give you this information really in real time.
Yes.
And even in this case, much like you have a device, a sensor on one side, you have a model, an engine on the other side that, with the aid of artificial intelligence, can really help to identify weather patterns. And this is something that potentially might help to prehandedly basically adjust the routing. So knowing that this lane is going to be critical this time of the year because of patterns, well, you do something about it, you reroute somewhere else. And last but not least, of course, political and geopolitical issues. I mean, that's something that has been plaguing pretty much any supply chain lately in the last few years. And when we talk about political and geopolitical situations, I mean, let's not just think about the most extreme cases of wars, social unrest, and so on and so forth. And let's also think about the ever-changing regulatory landscape and how this affects your ability to source from one particular place or to potentially ship into that particular place. And sometimes, I mean, these changes are a little bit sudden, and not sudden like overnight, but sudden that they don't leave you really a lot of time to prepare for it. There are sometimes some regulatory changes that come without any grace periods in some countries. I have experienced this firsthand. And that's something that you need to do something about to guarantee continuity. So, I mean, those are ways this analytics are being used nowadays.
Yeah, actually, this is like really interesting points that you highlighted, Mirka, and that's like really comprehensive approach, as I understand from the whole points that you highlighted from the technologies that are currently used in order to work with these challenges. It's really fascinating to see how these technologies really help to prevent the problems before they become like really big issues. And the question next that I have is more focused on the industries. So, what industries benefit the most from real time monitoring of the inventory, shipments, or warehouse operations?
I mean, I will answer this question knowing that I'm biased, of course, because I spent 15 years in the pharmaceutical industry. So clearly, for me, pharma and healthcare are the first industries that come to mind.
Yeah.
Exactly, because the regulatory component associated to temperature integrity, by example, it's something that is so critical that it can really like make or break a whole shipment, and it has like a number of like downfall implications. So cold chain tracking is something that, and real-time monitoring is something that has become more prominent over the last few years. I think a significant steep increase happened with the COVID pandemic and the launch of many vaccines. And of course, we're talking about products that back then when they were launched, they had very very little a very little amount of data in terms of like product stability. That was an emergency, so there was like an urge to launch the product as soon as possible. But that clearly means that there wasn't like really like years in the back to collect enough stability data. So the element of guaranteeing temperature integrity became extremely important. You need to do this because you really didn't know what was going to happen on one side. On the other side, it was like a strong regulatory push to make sure that the product integrity was guaranteed. So pharma and healthcare, long story short, have started to increase their usage of real-time monitoring, partially, due to the COVID pandemic. But it's something that, to be frank, had started already with some pilots, some company even more than pilots, some specific companies. And then I think what COVID did was to really accelerate the uptake of the technology. The other industry that comes to mind for me is retail and e-commerce, and that's something that has a slightly different perspective to a large extent because reality, that's one area where demand fluctuations are very very significant. And having like real-time visibility over your inventory allows you to manage that inventory, restocking, understanding which products you want to stock a little bit more of and which ones are actually slow movers, so maybe you can stock a little bit less. In some of during the educational campaign we ran at the World Practice, we were talking about these topics, and provide a few business case examples of companies that did well, companies that did not so well with machine learning. One significant example was from Tesco. Many of us know Tesco, but bottom line, Tesco is a large grocery store chain that is very, very established in the UK, and not just in the UK. And they started at the very beginning, when machine learning was becoming a thing being talked about. They started with the application of machine learning models to really better manage their inventory in the stores. The problem is that there were a couple of things that were a little bit underestimated. The first one was the data integrity, and the second one was the organizational implications. So the moment you start embarking on this kind of models, this kind of systems, you need to have personnel who are capable and trained to leverage these models. So in fact, at the beginning, Disco struggled quite significantly. The introduction of this machine learning system had the opposite effect to them. So it was really, really a disaster from an inventory management perspective. And then, of course, they adjust, the aim all along. But that's something that just gives a story. The bottom line is that retail, e-commerce are sectors and industries that are really, really susceptible to significant demand fluctuations. And for them, also considering the very, very shrunk margins that they experience, clearly managing inventory accurately, it's a very important lever of profitability and health for the company. The other industry that comes to mind is automotive, because automotive clearly is referenced in supply chain books. I mean, I can just name Toyota, and basically, long story short, we know that we're talking about excellence there. But clearly, in the automotive, the concept of just in time, by example, is something that is very, very common, very established already for years. And in reality, in order for you to have a proper just in time system, having real-time data is something that is very, very important. Knowing exactly what's going on the lines at any given time gives a very precise snapshot even to the suppliers in terms of when to replenish, how much to replenish, with which frequency. Is something is different in the real world from what's established and agreed on paper. Okay. Last but not least, obviously, I think it is somehow connected to what we said about pharma, and that's the food industry, food and beverage. Clearly, that's an industry where shelf life, particularly if we think about fresh and ultra fresh products, I mean, clearly you need to know in real time what's going on. I think there have been cases, even not in Europe, but there have been cases where some grocery stores have started to use basically some sort of dynamic labels and dynamic pricing labels. So effectively, price is changing according to the level of degradation perceived by sensors. This is the most advanced cases, or just in relation to the expiry date as reported on the food label. So I mean that adjusts the pricing accordingly. That basically allows to practice a bit of a yield policy when it comes to pricing, to make sure that you have as little obsolescence and waste as possible. So those are examples.
Yeah. So this is actually really great examples, and I absolutely agree with the industries that you highlighted. I believe each of these sectors relies heavily on precision and timely data. So that is why I completely agree with you. And moving next, now here's the question that often sparks debate. Are companies still relying too much on historical data, or has the shift to real-time analytics become the new standard?
I think it's really the usual adoption curve that we're witnessing. I think we, not too long ago, we published jointly a white paper on this, and there was one model that was explaining the technological uptake. I mean, that's pretty much the case. So you have pioneers on the one side, you have companies who are a little bit lagging behind, and then you got probably 80-85% of the rest that is somewhere in the middle in the journey. One thing to acknowledge is the fact that a shift is really happening. Okay, so I think right now, in particular, there's so much talk about artificial intelligence that it's very difficult for any company not to look at it in some ways or forms. Um, Compared to other technologies, I must say, artificial intelligence offers an advantage in terms of uptake, which is there are many models that exist out there offered by the giants in the industry that allow any company, no matter the size, without investing in incredible resources, to onboard some form of like machine learning engine and sorry, artificial intelligence engine that is really tailored and focused on the company itself, protects data, sensitive data, which has been traditionally for the last couple of years the main topic being talked about. So I think, on the one side, you got companies that are still very much relying on manual approaches to, by example, demand and supply forecasts, for based on historical data, based on really analysis of the past patterns and trends, in conjunction maybe with a more or less strong SNOP process, sales and operating plan process, and they get away with this. The problem is that, of course, that might not necessarily be a model that is always suited to capture what's really going on in the world. I think the vast majority of the company are using a part of this traditional approach alongside a part of real-time data analytics. So really leveraging data that in fact gets captured in real time and being brought back into the ERP system. I don't think there are many, if at all, any companies that are doing just real-time analytics. You see some good examples, particularly in the fast fashion world, and that's something that has become a little bit of a necessity considering the shift to an omni-channel approach. So for companies like, and I'm just calling names, you think about Zara that sells online and in store. I mean, clearly, it is absolutely paramount to have a very good, very strong level of real-time visibility over their inventory, because they run like 7 collections a year, and they need to be able to move very often products from store to store if there is an order placed by a customer, let alone the fact that they also need to manage in conjunction the stock that is dedicated to the online orders alongside the stock that is dedicated to the in-store shopping. So clearly, I mean, that's you have a few examples of this kind where by necessity they have to embark entirely on the real-time analytics journey. But let's bear in mind that companies like this, companies like Zara, for example, they started with digitization of their supply chains way before the rest. I mean, if we think about even the Gartner classifications of company in terms of like their supply chain maturity, I mean, there are companies like Apple and Zara itself and some others that are really like off the scale in terms of like how far they've gone in their journey. Of course, we need to take into account for the vast majority of companies, it's not out of laziness that we're not yet there where we could potentially be. It's because there are some adoption barriers. Of course, there are adoption barriers. I mean, the one-off cost to embark on this journey is significant. The data is a big problem. So work that you need to do on master data harmonization to get a consistent and coherent master data, it's another significant element, requires efforts. Fortunately, right now, new models, AI-based models are emerging to really aid in that space as well. So it's basically like doing the work on data cleansing first, and then implementing a sort of like more capable engine. And last but not least, I mean, another barrier that needs to be taken into account is the like resistance to change that might exist, both from a managerial perspective, and also let's not forget, I mean, there are always people running supply chains behind any sort of digitization. So these people
Yes.
need to upskill themselves. They need to basically learn new ways of working. Sometimes there might be fear, of losing their jobs, and on the other side of being replaced by machines, and on the other side, sometimes you need new um, professional competencies altogether. So you need to bring on board new people, people who have a different background, data scientists, by example, and this might not necessarily be the type of profiles that you might have in house already, or that you can form in house. So those barriers are real, are significant, they're not to be underestimated, and they probably help us understand why the switch to real-time analytics and analysis of real-time data, predictive analytics is something that is not potentially yet there where it could be.
Mhm. Yeah. Actually, I totally understand, Mirko, what you just highlighted, and this is like pretty complex. I can say like introductions that should be done in order to fully accomplish all the benefits of real-time data, and that is why it's more like seems like the secret source, where is like the blending of the depth historical insights with the agility of real-time data can ensure this kind of both strategic vision and responsive action. Yeah, but it's still like really in the future, and the companies are still working in this direction. So that is why, yeah, understand. And next, let's discuss the hurdles. So, what are the biggest challenges businesses face with integrating real-time data systems with the existing supply chain infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, Victoria, we named a couple of them just in the previous topic, but we can dig a little bit deeper into some more. I think one of the things to be taken into account is system compatibility issues. So integrating, legacy ERP and WMS systems with this new these new tools, but not necessarily be straightforward. There might be, again, compatibility issue, although many of these systems tend to be very flexible, very agile. But also there might be problems with regard to how the information is transmitted back and forth. Effectively, many of those ERP and WMS systems that exist, legacy systems, they were not designed initially to handle real-time data. So it might be even a capacity problem when it comes to those systems. And I'm just thinking about one example, which is quantum computing. There's been a lot of advancement in quantum computing lately. I think the latest estimates talk about maybe 10 years to get to a point of greater adoption, which is not long at all, and it's just an estimate as of today. But obviously, quantum computing would change completely the way we conceive systems altogether. But let's not get there. I mean, that's a little bit off topic. And just to say, quantum computing is like a technology that would be absolutely not compatible with the existing systems today. So, the update there is going to experience the same type of problematic. But clearly, one of the problems associated to the implementation of real-time data analytics based on real-time data capture from sensors is the fact that you got like so many devices, millions of devices really traveling around that are one way or another connected to a system, like a mainframe system. And that clearly sets some cybersecurity and data protection risks. I mean, cybersecurity is a topic that never gets solved. Okay, in fact, as the further we go with our digitization process of the industry, the greater it becomes, the greater an issue it becomes. So clearly, cybersecurity is something that is on its own also evolving and needs to evolve hand in hand with these new systems coming on board. We mentioned before the sort of like cost problem. We mentioned, there is like significantly high implementation cost to be taken into account, but also there is an element associated to data quality that we talked about before. We mentioned the master data integrity. The other element that is concerned with data is data overload. Okay, what I was mentioning before, potential capacity issues of the existing system. And then the other element that we talked about before is obviously workforce adoption. So the need for refreshing your workforce with new competences, new professions, new profiles, or at the very least upskilling some of the existing profiles, knowing that potentially not everybody will be in a condition to transition to these new ways of working.
Yeah, yeah, that's completely true. I really understand this point as well, and I can say like those challenges that you just mentioned like really hit the home. Updating the system while keeping everything running is pretty tough, and it's also important, as you mentioned, to protect the data and also that help people to adjust to these changes. So this is like really strong, like the biggest challenges that I believe the companies faces right now. That's completely true. And finally, can you share some insights on how to solve these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, not easy really. I think, if we consider, the first thing we mentioned, which is the compatibility issues with legacy systems. I mean, of course, one of the ways to go is to look towards API-driven cloud solutions. So clearly, those are the solutions that tend to be a little bit more flexible than the rest. It's becoming pretty much a standard for any new company coming to the market with these solutions. They tend to be API driven and cloud based because it's obviously the easiest way to integrate with the existing system. I would like to add that ideally, a switch to cloud-based ERP systems, or at least switching the existing ERP to and moving them to the cloud, could be
Yeah,
also a sensible move to enable this greater integration. But I mean, understanding that this is obviously easier said than done when we start touching the ERP of a company, especially if it's a large company. We know that the work is massive and probably lasts for a number of years. It goes on for a number of years. The other thing we talked about, the master data, etc. And for me, solution to this is pretty straightforward. The work needs to be put into that. Before embarking into any sort of like adjustment and upscale of the existing digital infrastructure, digital framework, the work needs to be put into addressing the existing master data, making sure that it's consistent, that it's coherent, that is basically in good shape. So, if I was to allocate a certain budget at the beginning, to basically embark into digitization, first thing I would do is getting the master data really, really well underway, and then think about the rest. Because with that not being in place, it's the usual equation, poor data in, poor data out. So there's
yeah,
no way to be mistaken there.
yeah.
Uh, okay, and because we touched just right now on the cost that might be associated with this, I mean, and before we mentioned that there is like a significantly high implementation cost. The one thing that comes to my mind is proceed in phases. I have a bit of road. I mean, this is not rocket science. I mean, it's typically the case, but like having a roadmap in place, knowing that you cannot boil the ocean, but you can start maybe taking a little bit a pot of water, a pot of
Yeah,
ocean water there on the on the gas stove. So really like proceeding phases. Clearly, spending enough time at the beginning understanding where the priority lies. Okay, so what is that you want to solve first? What is most pressing, most urgent, most burning? And on the other side, also understanding what is necessary to be done first from a system perspective to get there. Start from there. I mean, that's something that is generally very useful for a couple of reasons. First of all, it addresses a real issue. So it allows you to really return on that investment of yours you made. Second thing is that you have a tangible case, business case that you can present even internally to get additional fundings if need be to move to the next stages of adoption. So I think that's generally a clever way of tackling this.
yes,
Uh,
yes.
I think another thing that we mentioned is cybersecurity, of course. I mean, I'm not to be frank, I'm not an expert in cybersecurity. It becomes a very, very peculiar, very specific science. But I know that one way to go about this is to implement a, as you call it, zero trust architecture.
Yeah.
And personally, I'm also a big fan of blockchain as a technology. So having some sort of like blockchain-based verification for specific pieces of data, imagine for sensitive shipments and so on, could be an additional layer of security added on top of the existing one. Last but not least, workforce. I mean, this is because I love working with people, so this is one of the topics I'm mostly sensitive about. I mean, of course, embarking early enough in training and upskilling means that it's a necessity, to get your workforce on board, but it's also something that means that you need to start with your training pretty much when you start with your project, not at the end when the project is ready to go live and then you train people to work with the system. No, I think it's important to give and to create a foundation of education where people start to think in different terms, start to live and experience the technology in different terms. They start to potentially become interested in the technology. They
Mhm.
understand what it's all about. So when the time comes to implement the system for real, they're ready. They're not caught by surprise or anything. So I think those could be viable strategies.
Yeah, so that's like a really important points that you just mentioned, Mirko. And I see that that roadmap is really truly enlightening, and it shows that solving these issues isn't just about the technology, and it's also about taking care of the people and the processes. So that is why, as you mentioned, they didn't just code, but some kind of surprise that there are some changes that are upcoming in the company. So that's like a really great roadmap that you just outlined. So thank you, Mira, for sharing your thoughts and expertise with us today. Your insights help us like understand how the real-time data can really improve the supply chains. And stay tuned for more discussions on how technology is shaping the future of business.
Thank you very much, Victoria.